So we can now observe this kind of pro-Russian neutrality.
Especially considering the close personal relations between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin.
The probability of military conflict between China and Taiwan has increased.
Taiwan seeks to draw lessons from the use of military-civilian hybrid warfare to resist.
Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project by Ukraine Crisis Media Center, Ukraine Catholic University's Analytical Center, and NGO Euro-Atlantic Course. My name is Alexandra Tsahanovska. I'm the head of Hybrid Warfare Analytical Group at UCMC, and I'm very excited to talk today about China and how it watches the Russo-Ukrainian war with very close attention. If you want to know more about China factor of the Russian war, please subscribe to our channel to stay tuned. We can determine two key factors that influence China's interest in the current war and its position regarding it. The first, and that of great importance to Beijing, is the increasing possibility of military confrontation with Taiwan, that China considers part of its territory, very aggressively reacting to the support of Taiwanese independence at home and abroad. Russian imperialist policy, should it be successful and the price for it not heavy enough, will definitely inspire China to a harsher approach to Taiwan with the possibility of military invasion. The second factor is bilateral relations between China and Russia, widely celebrated as extremely close by the public officials and state-controlled media of the both countries. However, just how close are these relations indeed, and is Moscow getting everything it wants out of this friendship? These are the crucial aspects that we discuss today, starting with the head of Taipei office at European Value Center for Security Policy, Marcin Jerzewski. Marcin will walk us through Taiwan's position on the Russian-Ukrainian war and what lessons are being learned in Taipei from Ukrainian resistance.
Despite numerous differences between Taiwan and Ukraine, including geography and their respective roles in global value chains, Taiwan is closely watching developments in Ukraine as the two countries continue to face existential threats from authoritarian regional hegemons. There are two main areas in which Taiwan is seeking to learn from Ukraine as it valiantly defends itself from Russian aggression. Firstly, there are asymmetric capabilities. Since February 24th, it has become evident that while Moscow has more firepower, Kiev is using digital technology better. Taipei is closely eyeing these dynamics as it seeks to bolster its own defenses while recognizing its indigenous technological prowess. Ukraine proves that the lesser armed side can put up a strong fight. Taiwan's military is studying how Ukrainian forces are leveraging on its home battlefield advantage and experience in cognitive warfare so that they can incorporate those learnings into their own plans for asymmetric warfare. Secondly, there is civil defense. The Taiwanese people are taking note. Many are eager to play an active role in providing for their own defense. Ukraine's successful deployment of territorial defense forces has brought renewed focus to the possibility of creating a similar military reserve in Taiwan. This is important for Taiwan as the country emphasizes the relevance of the all-out defense concept to beefing up its national defense capabilities. The newly established All-Out Defense Mobilization Agency has been tasked with bolstering training for Taiwan's reservists, coordinating cross-ministerial cooperation to boost the capabilities of national reservists in the event of war and in disaster relief, and revamping mobilization plans for the nation's reserve forces to meet increasing threats. Moreover, from practical, skills-based workshops to lectures, handbooks, and privately organized defense groups, civilian organizations are trying to prepare Taiwan for an uncertain future. More broadly, Russia's illegal war rekindled conversations about the need to modernize Taiwan's defenses, which, by many accounts, are ill-equipped and understaffed. Amid a rare cross-party consensus, the Ministry of National Defense is currently preparing a report on conscription reform, including lengthening the period of compulsory military service. Moreover, this year's Hangguang exercises, the largest annual combat readiness exercise of the Republic of China Armed Forces, included a tabletop exercise based on various possible actions of the Chinese Communist Party in recent years to invade Taiwan, taking into account the lessons of the Russian war in Ukraine. Taiwan seeks to draw lessons from the use of military-civilian hybrid warfare to resist the combined military and psychological operations. The island nation remains extremely vulnerable to Chinese information operations. Since Russia began the invasion of Ukraine, we have begun to observe a rise in fake news campaigns related to the war, which mirrored the language of Moscow's propaganda. Chinese-backed social media pages on Facebook, Weibo, and Line parroted Russia in denying the veracity of the Mariupol hospital airstrike, accusing Ukraine of colluding with the United States to develop biological weapons, and exaggerated the scale of pro-Russian sentiments in Central and Eastern European countries such as Slovakia. Taiwan-based organizations, including the Taiwan Fact Check Center and Doublethink Lab, have been actively monitoring Mandarin language information operations regarding Russia's invasion of Ukraine and publishing reports on this considerable scale of the operations. The so-called red media, or Taiwanese-owned news outlets that actively fall in line with Beijing's interests, have also amplified the narratives which either vilify Ukraine or strip it from its agency, reducing it to a puppet of the United States and NATO. Interviews with Taiwan-based Russian scholars who are ideologically aligned with the Kremlin were aimed at increasing the credibility of such stories. As strategic interests of Moscow and Beijing increasingly converge, a firm and resolute stance of Western allies will be imperative in preventing future war atrocities in Ukraine and Taiwan. Moscow needs to pay the price for illegally attacking Ukraine, and Beijing needs to see that the world would not turn a blind eye to its aggression against Taiwan. Economic shocks threaten the survival of authoritarian regimes. Extended periods of economic hardship among the citizenry has the potential of introducing instability to regimes because members of the existing ruling coalition suffer welfare losses that force them to consider alternatives, while previously quiescent masses may consider collective uprisings a worthwhile gamble in the face of declining standards of living. In other words, this is not the time to shy away from assertive measures, including economic statecraft. Russia needs to be isolated technologically and economically. Meanwhile, Western allies should begin to enforce ethical standards in their economic dealings with Beijing, starting from strict forced labor prevention. Firmness and persistence are the only choice the West can afford. Slava Ukraini!
As Taiwan is actively seeking to derive experience for confrontation with a heavier military power and withstand the information and psychological operations from Beijing, what can the West do to prevent military confrontation between Beijing and Taipei? This is what China-focused analyst Petro Shevchenko will tell us about, among other issues.
Nowadays, against the background of the fall of the US-led international liberal order, the tensions between the USA and China rose. From the American point of view, keeping Taiwan in its sphere of influence is important if Washington aims to preserve its strong strategic position in the East Asia. While for China, the matter of reunification with Taiwan is vital, crucial, if Beijing wants to rise as the Asian regional leader. Therefore, now the probability of military conflict between China and Taiwan has increased. So, the first, how Taiwan is preparing for the potential military clash. And the second, what the US can do to prevent China from using its armed forces in an attempt to reunify with Taiwan. Firstly, Taiwan's administration has been rapidly improving its military capabilities. The Taiwanese administration's president Tsai Ing-wen got robust commitments from Japan and the US that their military forces will interfere if China invades Taiwan. So, the America-led coalition in the East Asia supports Taiwan. And, on the other hand, Taiwan has been rapidly increasing its weapons purchases in the USA, especially armory, aircraft, navy, and air defense systems. The main goal of Taiwan and the USA is to significantly improve Taiwan's army potential so that it is able to cause the asymmetric damage to the Chinese army. The most deadly, the most dangerous weapons possessed by Taiwanese are the cruise missiles, Xiongfen RE and Yunfen. They both can reach targets in China, in the north, central parts, in the south, and in the east. And finally, we can say that Taiwan is learning from the experience of Ukrainian resistance, and especially Taipei pays a lot of attention to the usage of territorial defense battalions. So, secondly, how Washington can prevent China from invading Taiwan? Obviously, the USA and Taiwan, they both hope that the increase of Taiwan's military capability will deter Beijing from usage of its army. Because at the moment, China doesn't have the decisive advantage. This is true. Chinese air forces, aircraft, and navy are inferior to American ones. However, China still can decide to invade Taiwan even despite huge losses. This will happen if Chinese red lines towards Taiwan will be crossed by the local administration, especially if the first, Taiwan publicly declares independence. The second, if Taiwan gets nuclear weapons. And the third, if the island's administration will decisively improve its military capabilities. In all those cases, the best solution for the USA is not to fight with China, but instead of this, find the common ground with Beijing on the Taiwan's issue. For example, somehow compromise. So the question of reunification with Taiwan will be postponed or conducted in the future in the peaceful way. Because from the realistic point of view, the question of Taiwan is not simple for China. It is the existential question for China. On the Taiwan depends the future of Chinese state. The reunification with Taiwan is the important part of President Xi Jinping's Chinese Dream Program, 中国梦. So that's why China will not step back on the Taiwan's matter. So if Washington really wants to prevent Beijing from using its army, it's better to find the way to make a deal with China and maintain the current status quo at least for some time. So that's why if the war is prevented, everybody will win. Otherwise, the military conflict can lead to disastrous consequences and chaos in the East Asia. Thank you.
We have established beyond doubt that given the importance and broader implications of the Russian war, China watches it very closely. Nevertheless, its position may be considered neutral, although this neutrality is, let's be honest, leaning towards Russia. Our next speaker, Natalia Butyrska, walks us through the key points of solidarity between Beijing and Moscow, including some of the disinformation narratives shared by Chinese state media, a topic that we have already touched upon. By the way, these narratives totally include a beloved story about the CIA-controlled biolaboratories in Ukraine, although in my personal opinion, China is simply trying to push back against the West and accusations of starting the COVID-19 COVID-19 global pandemic and find the US to blame for something similar. After all, China's foreign policy is rather anti-American, and we shouldn't mistake it for being pro-Russian. So let's welcome Natalia, who will tell us more about some of the peculiarities of China-Russian relations and how they are perceived in Ukraine.
My name is Natalia Butyrska. I'm an expert of East Asia. Since the beginning of the Russian aggression of the territory of Ukraine, China has become a special focus of the United States, the European Union, and the Ukrainian government. China has good relations with both Ukraine and Russia. For Ukraine, it is trading partner number one. According to the Kremlin, bilateral relations with Russia are currently the best in history. Moscow and Beijing recently noted that their cooperation has no limits. China has taken a neutrality position in the Russia-Ukrainian war and called for diplomatic solutions to the conflict. In this situation, Beijing could act as a mediator and help stop the aggressive action of the Russian Federation, especially considering the close personal relations between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. Russia's aggression has violated the principles that China verbally upholds, the sovereignty and integrity of independent state in the UN chapter. In addition, Russia's actions have led to global consequences: food, energy, humanitarian crisis, and most importantly, the deaths of thousands of innocent citizens of Ukraine, including children and vulnerable groups. After more than 100 days of war and attempts by the Ukrainian authorities to involve China in more constructive steps and real help in ending the war, it became clear that the Chinese government did not want to do so. China views the current war in the context of the confrontation between Russia and the West, especially the United States. Chinese narratives have repeatedly sounded in Chinese rhetoric that the West was to blame for the war because it did not want to take into account Russia's legitimate security interests in Europe. China does not see Ukraine as a subject in this war. The Chinese-controlled media have repeatedly called Ukraine a EU pawn and accused the United States of provoking war over its and its partners' decision to provide weapons to Ukraine. China also opposes the imposed anti-Russian sanctions, which, in its opinion, do not contribute to a peaceful settlement of the conflict. And yes, China avoids calling war as a war and recognizing Russia an aggressor. The neutrality declared by China is leaning towards Russia. In the EU Security Council, China votes against or abstains from adopting all resolutions concerning the cessation of Russian aggression on the territory of Ukraine. Beijing is also helping Russia spread disinformation about the war, repeating Russian narratives in its media and social networks, and censoring truthful information and material exposing Russia's action. During the war, Xi Jinping was never talked to Vladimir Zelensky, although he spoke with Putin. The Chinese authorities also ignored Ukrainians' call to become a guarantor of its security. In view of this, the Ukrainian government has acknowledged that it is currently satisfied with the status quo in which China will at least not provide military assistance to Russia and will not help avoid the sanctions. Russia is not only an important supplier of energy resources to China, but also its strategic partner in the fight against the United States and its liberal democratic order. The United States and its Asian allies have launched a series of measures in the Indo-Pacific region to contain China. In the light of the Russian-Ukrainian war, special attention is paid to Taiwan. China considers the island its territory and threatens to use force if Taiwan tries to declare independence. Currently, many Asian countries are concerned that the current situation in Ukraine may be the same in East Asia. China is very annoyed by the comparison of Ukrainian and Taiwanese cases. The Chinese government has repeatedly stressed that Taiwan is their internal problem and it belongs to the issues of China's sovereignty. Based on this, the China's ambivalence in Russia's war against independent Ukraine, in which China is trying to find a historical basis, seems strange. It is clear that the world's severe criticism and sanctions against Russia indicate to China the price it will pay in the event of aggression against Taiwan. For Beijing, the defeat of Ukraine will serve as another argument for the weakness of the collective West and a signal to increase aggression against Taiwan and even the Japanese Senkaku Islands, which China claims. So, the Russian-Ukrainian war, viewed by China in terms of its own geopolitical interests and confrontation with the United States.
So apparently relations between China and Russia appear to be less of an extremely close friendship that Moscow would desire, despite Chinese echo of many disinformation points that we have already discussed. In March 2022, public attention was heavily focused on the Western intelligence sources reporting that Russia has asked China for military support, facing the Kremlin fiasco of its blitzkrieg in Ukraine. Many feared that Beijing would agree and reinforce Russia in military terms. However, it did not happen. Our next speaker, head of the Asian section at the New Geopolitics Research Network, Mr. Yuri Poita, explores in depth how China has helped Russia in the course of war and how it has not. He also raises a very important question on what should Ukraine and its allies do to prevent more help coming from China to Russia in any form. So let's listen.
For the time being, we can say that we don't observe any military support, military assistance, and we also don't see any military technical assistance from China to Russia. And also we cannot observe the assistance from China to Russia in terms of bypassing international sanction. But at the same time, we can see that assistance from China to Russia on the diplomatic level and on the media and on the economy is remaining quite high. For instance, we can see and we can observe the full coordination between these two countries in terms of diplomacy and in terms of support in the international organization such as UN, such as State Council of the United Nations and others. And we can also see that China helps a lot Russia in terms of spreading its narratives. For instance, about so-called Ukraine crisis, about the blaming of the West in the war, about the blaming expansion and criticizing NATO for its expansion, and about the so-called legitimate demands and rational security demands of Russia in the European regions that should be respected, about so-called 20 United States biolabs in Ukraine, and also about sanction, and also in terms of providing Ukraine weaponry. So China is strongly against and completely against providing Ukraine any military assistance from the NATO, from the Western countries, and also China is against and criticizing the sanction that imposed for Russia. And on the in terms of economy, China also tries to deepen its relation with Moscow in terms of increasing the trade turnover, in terms of deepening its relation in energy sphere, and and others. So we can now observe this kind of pro-Russian neutrality, no military technical support, but in terms of economy, in terms of the information sphere, in terms of diplomacy, there are full and very strong coordination between countries. What should Ukraine and its partners do in order to prevent China from large-scale assistance to Moscow? And I believe that there are a few points that should be mentioned. For instance, China should be very well informed that in case of any military technical or other assistance to Russia in the war, China should be punished severely using international sanction, using other financial, economical instruments. Another point that China should understand that in case of any material support from Chinese side to Russia, all long-term relations with the EU, including economy sphere, including in technical and technology sphere, will be undermined severely. So any projects, any cooperation between EU and China will be damaged, including not on the institutional level, but also separately with the members of the European Union. And the third point that China should realize that Ukraine is not the puppet of the West or the so-called gray zone of the Russian Federation or the bridge between West and East. So Ukraine is an independent player with its own interest, and Ukraine will be very actively protect its interest against Russia, against other countries. So the voice of Ukraine in the political discourse and media discourse of China should be listened very, very carefully, and Ukraine should be in the Chinese media, in the Chinese discourse as independent player with its own interest. And another instrument that I believe it's very important is the usage of secondary sanction, because if China realizes that in case of any violation of sanction, it will be imposed secondary sanction on the Chinese companies, on the Chinese government, on the Chinese official. It will prevent China from doing any steps to support Russian Federation.
You've been watching the special project by Ukraine Crisis Media Center, Ukraine Catholic University's Analytical Center, and NGO Euro-Atlantic course, Ukraine in Flames. If you find our work useful, please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In the meanwhile, you can find in the description to this video information on how you personally can help Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. Remember that everything is going to be Ukraine.